Welcome to Baseball Biz on Deck. I'm Mark Carpenter, your host, and today we're going to look at the close calls that happen in sports. And with me today, I have an individual who has been tied into baseball in so many ways, whether it be through music, whether it be through analyzing as an umpire, whether it be running through statistics. But most importantly, we're talking with Lindsay Imber today. And Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Man, I cannot tell you enough how much I enjoy watching your close call sports on YouTube. The things that you cover there, just one, it amazes me because we see during a game as fans in baseball, all these different activities going on at the plate, and we see the umpire make a judgment or somebody's thrown out or it's either a ball or a strike, and we're scratching our heads and say, what the heck? But you give us clarity. So let me say thank you for that, because folks, if you haven't gone and seen close call sports on YouTube, please do, because Lindsay does a great job. But Lindsay, right, kind of give me an idea of how you got involved with this. I know you kind of grew up in LA, didn't you?
Yeah, I grew up in LA, and this whole idea started back in 2006, I believe it was. And it basically started as just logging ejections and keeping track of umpires, just as a very informal email chain between a few friends. And even before then, the way that I actually got into officiating to begin with was we had one of those student versus faculty games activities at school one day, and I noticed that there was one referee for it, and it was another staff member, and I thought, well, that doesn't seem too fair considering it. And we go back, and if you're listening to this and you remember the old school way when the AL and NL were separate, fully separate, you'd have split squads. You'd have half the umpires from the AL, half the umpires from the NL whenever you had interleague like World Series or All-Star Game or things like that. So I thought there should be a student that's doing this, and well, I guess I volunteered, and from there I stuck with it. So anyway, 2006 start this ejection fantasy league, and it was very simple, keep track of it. Then it's expanding to, okay, let's make it a little bit more spicy by perhaps trying to attribute a quality of correctness, try to figure out if the umpire was correct on a call or not. And you'd get positive points if they were right, and negative if they were proven to be incorrect. And so just really developed from there, where we were just finessing it on and on. And at some point, I think this was probably 2010, 2011, 12, we moved to the new domain, and it became more about, okay, we can actually talk about plays that aren't only ejection plays. Like, there are big plays that happen in baseball. So it started with the sort of the marquee plays that everyone's talking about, that there's controversy about. And then it moved to the more minute stuff and the more esoteric umpiring stuff, where it's these quirky rules that are different in college versus the pro versus high school and things like that, the baseball rules differences, for those of you that know that book. And from there, it just turned into basically any time that there is anything in the game that needs a rules touch to it. That's why I do what I do. Basically, I try to educate the fans and try to bridge the gap between fans, coaches, and umpires and such like that. Just make it so that everyone's on the same page. This is the rule book. These are the motivations that these different people have for doing what they do on the field. And ideally, we can work better as a team, and that means the umpires can work with the teams better without as much animosity at the end of the day. And it's just a smoother experience for everyone. And sports, at the end of the day, even though you have these hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, is about having fun. And so maybe if more people are educated about the rules and the spirit of the game, then there will be less of an emphasis on this argumentative style that we've developed in baseball, and more of an emphasis on just playing and having fun.
Well, I can certainly appreciate that. I mean, I almost think of like an old Norman Rockwell painting of a umpire in the face of a manager, and a manager in the face of an umpire, or a Billy Martin-esque type situation. But the ideal is, of course, to have some kind of kumbaya, some kind of understanding of what's going on. And it's nice when I go out and I see the catcher and the umpire getting along with one another, even when the catcher kind of protecting the umpire. I see questions being asked by a batter, but sometimes you're thinking, okay, maybe that's a little bit too much. But they're trying to have a rapport. I wanted to get into spring training and what's shaking out with it. Before we do, though, you recently put up something Close Call Sports about basically the rule acumen of certain players. I think it was an ESPN poll that came out and they asked like 10 questions.
Yeah, it's pretty simple in theory, right? It's just a 10-question quiz, true, false. So on average, if you guess true to everything, you'd get a 40%. And if you guess false to everything, you'd get a 60%. There's only two choices per question. Simple concept, but they put it out and the results were, on the one hand, expected, but on the other hand, still surprising that people that are making so much money in this game don't actually know the rules of the game that they're playing.
Yeah, you had was this Aaron Boone stat?
That was bizarre. And and this was back when Boone had retired, and he was sort of bouncing between that coaching and media personality, managing all of the above. And it was sort of played off as a joke, like, oh yeah, Aaron Boone, that knucklehead, got 1 out of 10, and it sort of was played off that way. But then he subsequently got the Yankees gig, and now 1 out of 10 isn't a laughing matter anymore when the stakes are so high.
No, and they are. And the understanding of what is around those stakes, I think, has become challenging. And you've really been covering that with the new rules during the spring training, because it doesn't seem like everybody's on the same page with this. So,
oh gosh, no.
Where do we start with that, Lindsay? What has been some of the biggest head scratching or things that people still need to figure out when it comes to that in spring training with the new rules?
Well, the three rules that are the fundamental rules changes are going to be your bigger bases, your infield shift ban, and your pitch clock. And no one really pays attention to the bigger bases because that's just a physical thing that's on the field. No one really needs to know that. It's
Right.
just there. As far as the infield shift ban, that's just an easy way to just pre-pitch positioning for your team, what you can and cannot do. So whether you like the rule or not, that's pretty simple. It's the pitch clock that's the complicated thing for everyone, because you're adding a clock into a game that never had a clock before. Like
Right.
NFL has a play clock, NBA has a shot clock, but they've always had game clocks even before they instituted the play clock or the shot clock, respectively. So for those sports, it's a little bit different because they're used to the idea of a clock. Baseball, no, never been done at the major league level. So now that they're doing it, people are finding out that the Nomar Garcia Parra glove patterning, or that habitual motion that he would do, step out and sort of adjust the various wrist devices that he wore, doesn't fly anymore because he would take longer than say 20 seconds to do that. And so you're finding that batters are trying to best adapt to get ready by the 8-second mark. And on that first day of spring training, we had Manny Machado, who got called for a batter pitch clock violation in the very first inning for that reason. And spring training is where you want to iron that out. So that's by design. There was going to be violation enforcement in spring training. That's what the directive has been. And you're getting pitchers who are getting called at the 0-second mark. I haven't really seen catchers getting called for failing to be in the box yet, because there's no reason for them not to be. Quite frankly, they don't have to perform a specific action. Like the batter has to be alert to the pitcher has to start their motion, but the catcher just has to physically exist in a box. That's not hard. So between the batters and the pitchers, we had the Scherzer rule that came into play, or interpretation. He's trying to best take advantage of the timing that he is given, and he's trying to throw the batters off by coming set before they're ready to go, which was okayed in his game, but then now it's emphasized that, okay, you're not allowed to do that. So Scherzer can't do that thing anymore. And today I've got a video to do. Nestor Cortez got called for a quick pitch in Washington. And then the next pitch, he decided, I'm just going to take an extra long time in my delivery.
Oh
throw
my.
to the batter. And it gets into the question of, well, what's the penalty for this? Well, there's no runner on base. There isn't. It's, you know as well as anyone that don't do that rule, which has no legal mechanism for enforcement. You just tell them not to do that. And it's funny because the umpire, I think it was Quinn Wolcott, just goes out, points at the pitcher, starts walking out, and does that gesture, two fingers to his eyes, like, I'm watching you. But you have to get creative. And the point with these rules is anytime you come up with a rule, there's going to be someone who tries to get around the rule. And it's how legislative does baseball want to be? How annoying do they want to be with what you can and cannot do? It's like, oh, you moved this way and you're supposed to move that way, so we're going to call this penalty. So yeah,
Thank
the new
you.
rules that are coming out this year in the spring has always been designed as an adjustment period, but I see this carrying into the regular season. And once it hits that regular season, and there are legitimate consequences like game ending situations that go on the record for the year, things like that, I don't think it's going to be funny anymore.
No, I mean, we had a balk off or two, I think, last year during the regular season. I was watching the game and suddenly the game is turned over because uh the pitcher supposedly balked. It was really kind of questionable in my mind. Of course, I think it was the Tampa Bay Rays. It was my pitcher. But the thing was that from that balk, there was the run came across the plate because the bases were loaded with that. The man took first, and there we go. It's done. And there's so much that an umpire has to keep their mind on and their eye on. And to add this on new with the pitch clock and then trying to find people who are trying to work it like Scherzer, it's got to be a challenge for these umpires. And I don't know if spring training is enough time for them to get it all figured out.
Yeah, my better half in the close call universe, T Mac worked one of those TrackMan games up in the Atlantic, and I remember that there is so much added pressure using that fully automated system, and that's not a pitch clock system. That's not what they were doing at the time. But anytime you add to the plate umpire's workload, you decrease human performance. This is actually something that I learned from the NTSB, because they have human factors investigators for their various operations. If you add too much to someone's workload, it creates problems and just complications. We saw the Randy Rosenberg ejection of JT Realmuto yesterday.
Yep.
Well, by the time you listen to this show, it could be last week or last month, right? But we saw that and it looked like a very quick trigger ejection. And you go into it and you saw that the pitch clock issue, a pitch clock violation on the pitcher Kimbrel, led to the whole thing. It sort of spurred the whole thing. And from there, the way that they want it is they want that clock to reset and start again when the pitcher gets the ball again. And well, what happens if the pitcher keeps throwing the ball out of play? And at what point does that become unsporting? You get into a situation where ordinarily an umpire that tries to put a ball into the catcher's mitt or throws it into a catcher's mitt, as some do, and it falls on the ground, you could just pick it up. That's it. But if you have a clock running, that's added pressure all of a sudden, in addition to everything else that you have to do. And now you have conflict between the defensive team and the officiating crew because of that violation call. And it's just so much unnecessary drama in the game, and it leads to stupid things like that.
Yeah, that Realmuto, I was sitting there looking at that. Okay, I guess you didn't see the ball coming from the umpire. And it's like, you knew that the umpire was myth. It was no longer an umpire just analyzing things. Personality comes in there and says, okay, obviously you're disrespecting me as an umpire, which I don't believe he was, but that had to be the sense of the umpire behind the plate with that particular action. And everything, as you mentioned, leading up to that moment, it wasn't surprising that I guess that he threw Realmuto out, and then what happened after that?
So it throws him out, and we have a 2, 3, 4, 5 minute delay while a new catcher comes into the game. So the pace of play initiative, but for the pitch clock, is working beautifully.
Gosh, no, I tell you, Lindsay, I saw that you do a great job. Again, I encourage everybody to go to YouTube to see Close Call Sports and that whole thing with Realmuto, because it really does kind of accentuate the idea of trying to save time in these games. Sometimes it just doesn't work. So, I mean, we've seen some reduction in time during spring training, but there's going to be moments that are just ugly out there too, like that one.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is that it's an adjustment for everyone, and people don't realize that, you're adding workload to the plate umpire, as we've said, but you're also adding restrictions and considerations for the defensive and the offensive teams likewise to play to these new rules. And so the pitcher is going to be closer to, he's more under pressure now, right? And the batter, same story, because the batter knows I have to go to the 8-second mark, and the pitcher, 0 is a little bit longer, so it's easier to draw that out. But you still have restrictions on throwing to bases, for instance. You have the maximum of 2 free throwovers or disengagements. And we saw that there was a pitch clock violation called the other day when a catcher requested time as the clock was running down. Umpire called time, but the catcher didn't move to go out to talk to their pitcher. So the umpire called a pitch clock violation, even though time had been called. So there's so many intricacies and wrinkles in these new rules, because I half suspect that they're making some of this up as they go along, because there are eventualities, no matter how well you plan for this or anything, there are eventualities that show up that you were not expecting, and you have to suddenly come up with a way to handle them out of nowhere. And you might have spent months and even years developing the overall scheme of a pitch clock, but you sure have to come up with a way to respond to a situation uniformly league-wide in a matter of hours or days, compared to the years that have been spent planning the overall pitch clock. So that's where you can start to get inconsistency.
Well, I mean, the whole idea, like I said, of the extra weight and what everything else that the umpires have to cover. I hear even they've got a buzzer on their forearm now to let them know when time runs. But I just don't know how they can continue to be as excellent as they've been in the past with that extra weight of other things to be paying attention to. I don't know. To me, it seems like a heck of a challenge. I know recently you put something up, maybe it wasn't so recent, where you were talking about the crew chiefs that were coming in and how experience and skills kind of come together. But maybe I'll come back to that, actually, because that's kind of going off further than I want to. But coming back to the pitch clock, do you think this is going to settle down? Do you think the rest of the season is going to see more bumps along the way?
There will be bumps here and there. I don't think that it's going to be as concentrated as it has been in spring training, because again, spring is meant for this. But I foresee that there will be issues that arise that we can't even predict yet, that surely baseball didn't even predict, that will arise regarding this, and they'll have to figure out how they want it handled at that time. And there will be confusion, and there will be a whole bunch of miscommunication and hurt feelings and potential ejections or other detrimental effects for teams as a result of it. And that's just growing pains regarding this new technology that baseball so desperately seems to have wanted, or at least the decision makers did.
I am curious to see how we do with staffing for umpires. And the reason I say that is it seems like in the past, I don't have numbers in front of me, but the number of umpires that came up from the minor leagues was rather limited each year. That once you came in and you were an MLB umpire, you weren't going to be going anywhere anytime soon. I mean, the aging and what we see of some of the umpires is there. So I'm wondering, with all of the training of the new umpires, the new school that the MLB has put out there, that they're training across, that with all these folks who've been watching a pitch clock in the minor leagues, how many of them will we be seeing coming up? Has there been much change in the umpire staff from 2022 to 2023?
I don't have league organizational wide statistics on this, but I don't think that it's been that drastic compared to prior years. You have basically, this is around the time of a generational retirement. We go back to the 1999 failed resignation strategy, and so many people coming into the league at that time, and they got vested 20 years in. And so this is sort of this, we're in that 5 to maybe 7 year window of increased retirement rates. And we saw it with the most retirements at once since 1999 occurring this past offseason.
Right.
So you're going to have new people in the major leagues for that reason alone. And that, of course, cascades and down to the minors. So you're going to have people being hired to attrition, as it were. We have to remember that baseball has pushed to actually contract its minor leagues and eliminate markets.
Oh yeah.
And so that, by necessity, I suppose, eliminates umpire jobs in the long run. And so that means that whatever gains we think we're getting there are offset by these eliminations that are structural in nature. So you could throw COVID in there. That's another wrench. And at the end of the day, I don't think that the structure in terms of the personnel that is the influx of personnel versus the outgoing, et cetera, I don't think it's too different from years past, because I think you have offsetting factors involved.
Yeah, well, the only reason I was thinking about that is I was wondering, as we bring in new umpires from minor leagues, if they will have, I guess I should say, more of an being at ease with like the pitch clock and some other things that have been in the minors for a while.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, there's definitely a comfort level, as the statistics bear. The umpires in the minor leagues had been calling to computers for essentially their entire professional careers in some cases, and you're seeing that those umpires come up and have better numbers, not surprisingly, on the computers, because they've been trained in calling those things for years, compared to the major league guys who might have come up years ago before even Quest Tech existed. So they don't have that experience, and they're not able to call to the computer. And so I think that you're absolutely right. It's a salient point that umpires who have developed with a clock their entire professional career would be best equipped to deal with a clock at the major league level, because they're used to it, versus people coming in who are not used to the clock, that now have to adjust to the fact that there is a clock. The one thing that the clock does that's sort of not talked about as much, and we did talk about the workload of the plate umpire increasing, but a very specific performance factor on that issue is baseball used to always be an ebb flow game. You'd throw a pitch and then you'd throw it back, and the umpire would make a call. It would go back to the pitcher, and so you would just wait it out until the next pitch needs to be thrown. So there was sort of this wave pattern of high intensity, high involvement in the game, and then once the pitch is done, you can take a breath and it's back to low, and there's sort of that oscillating wave pattern throughout the game. Now, with this pitch clock, the umpire has post-pitch responsibilities, such as making sure that the clock starts on time, making sure that the batter is in the box at 8 and the pitcher's ready. If you have a 15-second clock with no one on base, then that's only effectively a 5 to 7 second break, whereas it was the sort of break or rest period might have been double that in the past. And from a human factors perspective, you're in a state of excitement for much longer and for much, I guess, for a greater proportion of time than you had been in the past. And that is proven to have negative effects on human performance.
Have there been any concerns about, I guess I want to say the physical impact on a pitcher, on their ability to take time to, I don't know, relax the arm, or if they're being forced to move so quickly that the potential for injury has increased? Is that possible, or is that anything that's being discussed? I guess I should really say.
Well, we know one thing that can increase pitcher potential for injury, which is the pitch clock violation at 0, and they're trying to beat it, and they get called time in the middle of their delivery, and they alter. That's one of those consequences. But we've seen pitchers who can adapt to the groove of a faster pace, and if they incorporate it into their overall game, they just sort of take their cadence and compress it by a factor of however much it needs to be to fit within the confines of the clock configuration. They can do that and be unaffected and have a fine game because they're used to working at a faster pace. But for pitchers at a slower pace, that's obviously a bigger adjustment. They might struggle a bit. And for people like Max Scherzer, you saw in that Max Scherzer game that we had, where he got called for that pitch clock violation, where he came set before the batters got into the box and were ready and alert to the pitcher to try to throw them off. He really threw himself off because suddenly his cadence is disruptive by the very virtue of him voluntarily disrupting it to fool others, except he ends up fooling himself. So if the pitchers stay in their own game, perhaps they do just as, if not just as well, if not better. But if they're going to, just as the umpires do, have to play to a clock and that becomes their primary concern or distraction, that could have a negative impact on the rest of their performance.
I'm really going to be watching this year how many bases are stolen.
It should go up. I mean, the bases are bigger. We don't think about it too often, but I'm putting together a video of unintentional interference, and I'm looking at a play at second base, and it was a bad throw, and I realized, oh, the fielder doesn't even have to go back and lunge because the base is bigger, so their foot's already there. So
I mean, the frequency that a pitcher can throw over is, they can't throw over 7 times. They got 2 shots at it. I mean, 2 shots of actually stepping off the rubber, right? Because, I mean, if they step off for one reason, it doesn't have to be throwing over, because if they've already stepped off for another reason, then they'll have one at bat to throw over first.
This is one of those rules differences with college, right? In college, you are allowed one, as they call it, one free disengagement before you get called for a balk on the next one that is an that does not result in a runner being retired or anything like that. However, college treats disengagements differently than pickoff throws. If you throw the ball to the base, it doesn't count against your limit. So you still in college have unlimited pickoff throw opportunities. In Major League Baseball, that's not the case. You are allowed 2 disengagements instead of the 1 in college, but pickoffs count as disengagements. Whether you technically throw to the base from a disengaged position or not, it still counts as a disengagement in Major League Baseball for the purposes specifically of this limitation rule. So in MLB, if you step off for any reason, it counts as a disengagement.
Yeah.
If you throw over, it also counts as that for the purposes of determining the limit of 2. And then, of course, you have to retire the runner on the 3rd time you do it, or it's a violation, right? So, there are rules differences that are so perplexing sometimes because you have 2 different governing bodies doing 2 different things because they have 2 different goals. And in baseball, at the major league level, and even at the minors, the goal is to manufacture offense. The NHL did a whole bunch of rules changes designed to try to manufacture offense during the dead puck era, as it was called. And this was like 10, 20 years ago, and they ended up succeeding in allowing more goals to be scored. For instance, instituting the trapezoid, that the goalie can't play the puck in what they call the pie slices in the corners behind the goal line. It led to more offense, and that appears to be what baseball's trying to do with some of these rules as well.
Well, I'm really curious to see how that'll play out. And I got to tell you, I dislike that whole thing as far as the disengagement. And I thought, come on, really give a pitcher a chance. I'm not saying he should be able to throw over there 7 times in a row, but something more than 2 disengagements, especially if you count him just stepping off the rubber as a disengagement, and as opposed to having it measured separately as a throw over. So I don't know. That's a hard point for me, but we'll see how it plays out. My biggest concern always is the players, is hoping that there'll be less injury. So I'm hoping that larger base actually does some of that. The pitch clock, it's going to be interesting to watch. Me, I've never been a person who has a problem with the shift, but a lot of people do, and I get that. I hate it when you see like 5 guys lined up between second and first. But outside of that, I like the idea that batters had to be a little bit more creative. They had to hit Oppo. You'd see Bo Bichette. He adjusted to that. But it's the nature of things.
Yeah, the main difference in the sports, speaking of like a sport where you're seemingly always either always on or always trying to catch your breath, like basketball or hockey or something, or even soccer for that matter. The difference is from those to baseball is those sports are all about sort of this, if you think of just a simple curve that like a bell curve that goes up, it hits its apex and it comes back down, right? And it's more compressed in those sports, whereas in baseball, it's not as much of that. It doesn't reach the same peak, but it is a longer duration of intensity, but it's not as intense, if that makes sense. So effectively, you have a higher but narrower peak in some of these other sports. Baseball, your mountain curve, as it were, is much flatter, but it goes on for longer, which is a concept that I've become very familiar with lately. And what baseball is effectively doing with this pitch clock shortening games is trying to compress baseball's curve to make it match better with one of those other higher intensity contact sports. And one of the things that I'm kind of concerned with, as you stated regarding injury, is the durability of baseball players. You play 162 games
Right.
plus spring plus post. And of those games, that's double what basketball and hockey play. And that's, I can't do math in my head, times more than football players play. And my concern regarding that durability aspect is, well, if you're compressing that curve, that curve's the way that it's set up in baseball, the longer, flatter curve lends itself to a marathon season. But if you start compressing that, is that going to cause problems if you draw out the games too much and you put people under too much stress and strain in a shorter amount of time throughout the year? That is to be seen.
Well, I know you worked with hockey and being an organist as well and have an interest in the game. But now NHL, they put kind of a break in the middle of their season, did they? I mean, more so than what we have in baseball with an all-star break. They take a little more time than that, don't they?
The NHL instituted, because of this, and in consultation, I believe it was a CBA agreement that came through, a negotiation that each team has a bye week, and you have a break for a week during the season. And that is in addition to the all-star break. That is in addition to the Thanksgiving break, and that is in addition to the Christmas break. NHL takes its time because it knows what sport it is. And it seems to work out well. And of course, you have the Olympic break during Olympic years as well, which gives you an extra 2 weeks off, and it draws your season out a little bit longer, yes, but it allows for different breaks and recovery periods. And I feel for the Olympic athletes who have to go give it their all at the Olympics during the break because they don't get much time off. But
Yeah.
baseball doesn't have that, as we know. Each team plays pretty much, not for the most part, you can say it's every day with a day off here and a day off there, and it's inconsistent on the days off. We know that baseball has consistent days off assigned to Monday and Thursday on the calendar. Everyone plays Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Tuesday, Wednesday. But what I've noticed is that's the way it used to work. That's how series were always set up: 3-game series, 4-game series. They were always set up so that the 2 off days that a team could have were Monday and Thursday. But MLB has tried doing, and this was an interleague push a few years ago, and by a few years ago, it's probably more than a decade at this point, they had what they would call squeeze weeks, which would be 2-game series instead of 3-game series. And usually the way that it got set up, for especially for interleague teams in the same market, so the stadiums are fairly close together, is that you would get a team playing 2 games at one venue, and then they would go and play 2 games at the other venue. And so it's a 4-game series, but it's split up into 2 and 2. And within the squeeze week, eventually they decided, why don't we just take away the second set of 2? And it's just 2 games, and then a team can be off on a random Wednesday. So you get more days off that way, but it's still 162 games. The timeline is still fairly consistent, as in you pretty much can say beginning of April to the end of September, but it's sort of started creeping because of the extra days off into late March and early October.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of concern with some folks with the World Baseball Classic about some of these pitchers being overextended. But I know also, well, the pitchers, you say, well, they should probably have some time off, because even if they're in the winter league, there is a break between that time and spring training. But World Baseball Classic, oh gosh, there's got to be a way to place that, maybe, I don't know, in the middle of the year, because I'm thinking about what hockey has done, and putting a space of a couple of weeks in there. I would just absolutely love to see this. I mean, what will we do with the All-Star game, though? I don't know. I've enjoyed that World Baseball Classic so much, and watching so much great talent out there.
You're right, because I remember when MLB said, not regarding the WBC, but the Olympic Games themselves, hey, we're not going to be sending major leaguers to the Olympics. And that was how hockey had that stance at one point, too. And so hockey had experimented around with, okay, let's do an Olympic break. Do we take games out of the season? So they shortened the season to accommodate it. Then it became, no, we can just push every game. We keep our 82 game schedule. We would just push all the games back by 2 weeks to accommodate the break. Baseball has a very different attitude in this, because baseball from the very beginning was, whatever the tournament, we are going to be playing major league games basically concurrently with those games at the same time, simultaneous. So
Right.
major leaguers are obligated to stay in the majors if it's regular season action. And so it's just a different approach that they have taken, which, as you say, deprives us potentially of the opportunity to see something really special in the summer as a showcase tournament.
Indeed. We've been talking a lot about the pitch clock and the new rules that come out, but I have to tell you, one of the first things that attracted me to Close Call Sports on YouTube were some of the things that you were doing with looking at Joe West and Angel Hernandez early on, because gosh dang, those folks would be so entertaining. Not necessarily some teams appreciate that as much as a detached fan, but my gosh, you've always got some great material to work with, Lindsay.
Thank you. Yeah, I always say that anytime Joe West was in a title, or Angel Hernandez is currently in a title, that generally corresponds to an increase in engagement, because people just love to. A lot of people like to pile on without even knowing what happened, and it's sort of become fun to try to figure out, okay, is this a situation where we can explain what they're doing, or is this a situation where we have to say, I have no idea what's going on because this call doesn't make sense to me. And with Joe, there was a play where, and he has admitted doing this early in the career, which is like, he'll call it incorrectly to test someone. And it's sort of like, that's the old school umpire mentality.
Oh yeah.
You don't do that in the World Series, but you can do it in spring training, for instance, right? Or that's the way it used to be. And Joe was a very good manager about picking his spots for things like that. He knows full well that when time comes down, and the numbers do reflect this for Joe, he steps up, and he knows that, okay, my game management ability to give the pitcher the extra edge of the plate, or the batter this, or whatever it is, he knows where he can pick his spots and where he cannot, and he has to call to the computer. And that's why his postseason numbers, there was an ALCS game a few years, Houston, I think, where he was like one pitch away from a perfect game, because he knows when it's crunch time, I have to step up and call it this way as opposed to that way. So that was Joe. And I don't want to get into a situation where, I don't want to get LaDuca'd here. So I'm not, I don't want to say anything that can get me a suit.
No. But that's an interesting point you share about, when he came down the crunch, that there was a certain flexibility in spring training and other moments that there wouldn't be in other times. And that goes to a point that I, again, a little concerned about with all the new rules, is you said game management. And I'm thinking flexibility of an umpire in a situation to make a decision as to be hard and fast to a very unique rule. That has that flexibility been, diminished because some of the new rules?
Yeah, the flexibility and the discretion. The discretion is the ultimate friend and foe of umpiring at the same time, right?
Right.
So if your discretion is what they're trying to eliminate from the game, to try to say, hey, we want you to be uniform. This is really a movement that's been going on ever since they consolidated the leagues like 23 3 years ago. So they have really been going on this idea of uniformity and things like that. And yeah, that does eliminate some game management opportunities, and it does eliminate some umpiring abilities to do this, that, or the other to try to control things. But the idea is that everyone will eventually adjust to what's going on, and they will be able to comply with whatever the new terms are, whether they like them or they will follow them. And it's to be seen which ones are going to stick and work and which ones aren't. We know that the executives like to push things through, or at least it would appear that they do like to push things through sometimes. And generally speaking, some players, there used to be an NC2A saying, right? Call the foul, the player will adjust. And that's basically, it's sort of like institute a new rule, the players will adjust.
Well, I think you're on the money with it. I want to thank you again for everything that you do with Close Call Sports. Now, I'll encourage everybody again to watch that, to go to YouTube, and because you give great examples, you break down the rule book on what's being seen, and put that video right there and walk us through it, moment by moment, action by action, and then able to point to the rule book saying, this is what's being done here. And, oh, well, they may have had some confusion, or maybe they thought they needed a warning, but it didn't really call for it. So you do a great job of that. But I want to also give you kudos because you're very diverse. You're a musician as well. You're an organist for the Anaheim Ducks, aren't you?
I am. That is a job that when I joined the Dodgers in security management back in 2000, 11, I don't know what year it is. But I joined the Dodgers, and this, for those of you local to California, you'll remember that 2011 opening day was Brian Stowe violently attacked in the parking lot. And that was my first day when I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't hands-on. I was just sitting back and observing what was going on. And I hear this call about this atrocity, and I'm like, is this how it is here every day?
Oh,
And you realize that it's not every day that bad, but there. So anyway, I started at Dodgers. I very quickly said, I'm not going home at 5 o'clock because of traffic. Traffic's too bad, and I get too frustrated. And when your brain tells you that you need more things to do, sitting in traffic is not a helpful coping mechanism. So instead, I would stay at the stadium, and it's like, oh, press box. That's where we would, as staff, that's where we would during the off season eat lunch anyway. That's where they serve the food. That's where we'd eat the lunch. So we would basically sit in the press reporter seats, and that's where we would eat. And press box had the organ there, and so eventually I was like, hey, I can play piano, so I should play this too. I had a very long idolization of the organist position, and for the Dodgers at the time, it was Nancy B, and I followed her a lot in terms of what her career was up to. And I thought, wouldn't this be a treat to play on this instrument of hers? It's not hers technically, or it's the stadium's, right? Or it's the team's. But I thought, well, I'm not doing anything. There's no one here, and I need to do something for like an hour or two until it's time to go home. Traffic cleared up enough. And so I would just play organ in the press box. There's a Roland Atelier 80S. And eventually I was playing, and one of the sound guys, like maintenance people and operations, that hooked me up with how to do this and how to do that. And eventually our sound engineer there was like, hey, this is good. And there was a corporate batting practice going on, they use a DJ playlist for those corporate batting practices. He's like, hey, you want to play live in the bowl for this thing? And I did, and I became the sort of corporate event organist, if that makes any sense. So I did that for a little while, and eventually I left the security position there. And it was funny because I thought I had left the Dodgers in 2014, only for them to talk to me in 2015 and say, Nancy's going on vacation for an entire homestand. Would you like to be substituting in for, a 6-day residency or whatever. And of course I jumped at that. And so it's like I left the team in 2014, but I got hired in a different department on the team in 2015. And that was around the time I had just done the Ducks Stanley Cup run in 2015. That was my first time in Anaheim as well. And the Ducks knew me from the Dodgers, oddly enough. And they knew that I had been playing organ for corporate BPs and things like that. And I had a YouTube channel and I still do, with a whole bunch of musical performances and things like that, especially with the focus on ballpark organ. And so they liked what they heard and brought me into audition, and I went down and started playing. And if they very quickly offered me the job there, they basically goes downstairs. We want to hear what it sounds like in the bowl. They go down, they come up like a minute later. Okay, you got the job. and so I was on summer break from the Ducks when the Dodgers called. And the only reason the Dodgers ended up calling is not because they knew me from Dodgers. It was because they called the Ducks to ask them who their organist was.
Wow.
So that's a very backwards way of getting back into the Dodgers organization, but whatever. And I've been in Anaheim ever since, playing these hockey games, and it's been a great time. And especially early on, I think I know it's not what kept me on the team, but I know that a valuable contribution I've made is I know the rules of the game. And when a referee calls something, number one, obviously, I'm going to tailor my song selection to what's going down on the ice. So hooking, I do like that Never Smile at a Crocodile, the Captain Hook stuff from Peter Pan. Things like that. Delay of game is clocks. There's some go-tos that I have. I just came up with one yesterday, actually, that I could have come up with a long time ago, but it just occurred to me yesterday, which was on a power play. On a power play, it was Britney Spears' Stronger. But it's kind of fun to come up with things that fit the situation. And so knowing the rules, I would be able to call out penalties. I'd see the referee call. So I'm like, okay, we have a delayed penalty here, and then the call gets made, and I can tell it's like, oh, it's a trip, it's a hook, it's whatever it is. So we have everything ready to go, graphics and all of the other stuff ahead of time. And so I would be calling games when people don't know whether we're going on timeout or not, because, icing, you don't go to a TV timeout, things like that. I would be able to call those things ahead of time, which was like, okay, I have a valuable perspective for our little team. And just throughout I started that in 2015, it's 2023 now. So this is like year number 8. And it really feels like, the time has flew. I should consult my grammarian, but I'm also not that dedicated to the language.
Well, you are dedicated to your music and you're dedicated to the game. And we can't thank you enough, Lindsay, for that, because you make it very enjoyable. I got to tell you, I mean, I've been in some games where the only thing that's played are sound effects. I figure there's somebody with just a few keys to do that with. But from what I've seen of yours with the Anaheim Ducks, I love it, the way you're incorporating different tunes to match up to the action out there in the calls. So I want to congratulate you. Is there anything else that you want to share with our audience here today about what they should be thinking as opening days coming here in a moment or two?
Yeah, I still have to put the crew list out, don't I? These things sneak up on me, because there was a time with baseball, it was like, okay, when can I put this stuff out? It's not public, so when can I put, MLB at one point got mad at me for putting out quote unquote private information ahead of time, so I have to sort of walk a fine line with that. Just a quickie on this one. This was when Bob Davidson retired, and his last game was with the Angels. And so this is in Anaheim. It's 2000, whatever it is. And this was one of those years where, you know how MLB on the last day of the season, they like to synchronize all the games to start at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
So East Coast was 3:05, and the West Coast, it was basically noon, which is around the time that I'm pulling into Angel Stadium parking lot. We used to park at Angels for Ducks games because the buildings are across the street from each other. And I'm pulling in there as their game is getting going, and I hear over the PA that it's Bob Davidson's last game. And so I post the retirement story on the site, and I get a call from Major League Baseball being super mad about like how did you know how can you post this proprietary information, whatever. And I'm like, okay, before I respond to this, we got the stadium public address announcement. I looked at the Angels game notes. It was also in there that it's Bob's last game after 30 whatever years. And then third, it was tweeted by an Angels beat reporter. And this is like an hour before I said anything and 2 hours before I put it on the site. So I'm like, I know what you guys are thinking, but I really don't break news. I just fix it.
Oh gosh, Lindsay. Oh, I love the organism that's MLB. I'll tell you that right now.
A lot of people do, but yeah, as opening day gets going, I would just say that baseball season, it's basically what I always found interesting working at Dodgers and I guess Ducks too, is opening day is this mammoth event, right? With sellouts everywhere and all this stuff. So you go from 0 to 100 basically in baseball.
Oh yeah.
And it's the same thing on the last day of the season. You go from 100 back to 0 when you're done, when your team is done. So as the season starts up, we have growing pains with the new rules, mainly the pitch clock. I think that eventually it will not be as big of a story as it is now, but while it is still a big story, as long as that is still something that people are interested in talking about, I'm very happy to be doing videos on it because I also like to make fun of rules that I don't like.
Well, thank you for sharing that enjoyment with us because we love it. And I'll encourage everyone again, talking with Lindsay Imber, and that's Lindsay is the host and organizer, and I guess boss of it all when it comes to Close Call Sports. So the Close Call Sports channel on YouTube, great stuff to see and entertaining as well. So Lindsay, thank you very much for joining us here today on Baseball Biz, and I hope you have a wonderful season.
Thanks so much for having me. Everyone, please subscribe to Close Call Sports on YouTube.
There you go. Where else can they find you?
CloseCallSports.com. We're so original. Twitter.com/CloseCallSports. Facebook.com/CloseCallSports. I tried Instagram, but I got super frustrated with it, and I just don't trust TikTok enough to use it. No, it actually, I don't know. Will it get banned? What's going to happen with that? I've been following it very loosely, but I'm like, I've never was on it in the first place, so why should I even care?
I think that's a good strategy. Oh, wow. Well, again, thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Lindsay Imber from Close Call Sports, one of the most interesting YouTube channels I ever found. And I got to tell you, Lindsay, like I said, does a fantastic job of bringing up what's happening across the plate and giving some great details on umpires' decisions. So I strongly suggest checking her out. Also, want to remind you that I'll be down at the Tampa Baseball Museum this week. I'll be there on opening day, so March 30th. Hope to see you there. Plus, Matt Germain and I are going to be taking a look at opening day, what it's going to be looking like across all 30 teams in the MLB universe. So we look forward to talking to you about that as well in an upcoming episode. And thank you again for joining us today here on Baseball Biz On Deck. And remember, you can find us across pretty much any of the podcast directories, as well as finding us on the website of baseballbizondeck.com. So thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to talking with you again real soon. Special thanks to XTakeRUX for the music rocking forward.